Hey guys, tonight we're sneaking through velvet curtained corridors and gold-leafed antechambers not to admire the gowns or jewels, but to get a whiff of the real royal lifestyle. Picture this, a marbled palace echoing with whispers where noble women glide gracefully down polished halls, wearing the same underthings for weeks. That fan in her hand, not just for flair, it's because someone forgot to empty her chamber pot. And that glow on her face? Not so much a skincare routine as it is several layers of ancient grease paint. And maybe a touch of mildew. Yeah, you probably won't survive this one with your romantic image of court life intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the sitting room of a 16th century French chateau, expecting elegance. And to be fair, it does look the part. Rich tapestries, embroidered cushions, silver candle holders flickering by the hearth. But then there's the smell. Sweet, yes, but sickly. Like overripe pears mixed with something vaguely barnyard. It's not the horses. It's the ladies. Here's the thing. Bathing was not a daily activity for noble women or anyone. Really, during most of the medieval and Renaissance periods. Sure, Roman baths had been a thing centuries before. But by the time Europe was deep into powdered wigs and ruffled necks, water had developed a reputation for being dangerous. People thought warm water opened the pores and let in disease. Better to sponge off with wine, vinegar, or rosewater. That counts as clean, right? You think royalty would be above all this. But no, Queen Elizabeth I famously took a bath once a month, whether she needed it or not. And some noble women bragged that they never bathed, just perfumed themselves into oblivion. A clean scent did not mean a clean person. That's where the handkerchief came in. Those dainty, lace-trimmed cloths were clutched constantly, not to dab away tears, but to waft perfumed oils beneath the nostrils. Think of it as a scented force, field between you and the rest of the reeking court. And then there's the matter of chamber pots. No indoor plumbing, no elegant exits, just a ceramic pot tucked beneath a brocade stool. Some were made of silver, for that extra touch of refined illumination. But they were still what you think they were. In a crowded hall during a lengthy royal audience, noble women might simply step behind a privacy screen and well do their business right there. A lady's maid would then discreetly remove the pot, often walking past other guests like she was carrying embroidery floss. If you were lucky, there was a garderobe, an early version of the toilet, but these were often placed next to the walls of castles and emptied by gravity into a pit or river, which meant one thing: the castle moat. That scenic feature in fairy tales? Basically a giant open sewer. Still feel like fantasizing about living in a palace. Let's say you're at Versailles. You've been invited to the Queen's morning toilet, a semi-public ritual, where Marie Antoinette's hair is styled and her face is painted. Courtiers elbow for position, hoping to hand her a glove or lace ribbon. And you're surrounded by noble women dressed in layers of silk and velvet. But their gowns are weeks old, their linen shifts unwashed, and there's an undercurrent of sour milk and sweat. Historians still argue whether the French court's hygiene was uniquely awful or simply more public about its filth. Some claim the royal fountains at Versailles were clogged with human waste more than once during summer galas. Others argue that while bodily washing was rare, nobles were fanatical about scent masking, so perhaps they just smelled weird, not rank. You stand beside a duchess. She's powdered, plucked, and painted, but her breath smells like old meat pies. She's just nibbled a comfit sugar-coated spice, which she hopes will freshen her mouth, but it's only made it worse. Toothbrushes weren't common. A noble woman might rinse her mouth with vinegar or wine, chew a sprig of mint, or rub her teeth with crushed coral or ashes. Better than nothing, but not much. Oh, and if you thought staying dry was enough, think again. Parasites thrived in the seams of gowns, in layers of petticoats, in wigs. And lice weren't just tolerated, they were combed out at the dinner table. While women discussed politics and pearls, you might scratch absently behind your ear with a jeweled stick pin. And that was considered classy. But perhaps the oddest part of noble cleanliness, the ritual of the public performance of hygiene. These women weren't lazy. They were constrained by cultural ideas about what was safe and proper. Bathing too often was frowned upon. Touching water was feared. But showing off your perfumed gloves or imported powders, that was status. So you sat through long hours, sweating under velvet, with no deodorant, no soap, and no relief except that ever-present bottle of scented oil and your trusty hanky. There's something almost impressive about how confidently it was all carried off. Graceful gestures, powdered faces, Embroidered slippers and weeks of sweat beneath the satin. A lesser woman might wilt. But noble women, they perfumed their way through the filth. You're standing now in front of a Venetian mirror, hand-polished glass framed in gold. The kind that reflects not just your image, but every questionable decision you've made that day. And right behind you, a noble woman leans in close. She's smiling, or at least, you think she is. It's hard to tell through the layers of white lead caked onto her skin, and the wide smear of something vaguely crimson clinging to her lips. She looks elegant, ghostly, a little like she's melting. That's not a trick of the light. That's her face. Let's talk about rotting teeth and beauty rituals, because noble women, in their quest for youth and radiance, often did more damage to themselves than time ever could. Start with a smile. You may imagine a courtly lady lifting her fan and grinning sweetly at a suitor across the ballroom. But odds are, she's doing everything in her power not to show her teeth. Why? Sugar. Once rare and precious, sugar exploded in popularity among the wealthy during the late medieval and Renaissance periods. A noblewoman's pantry might contain candied fruits, spiced sugar lozenges, and sweetmeats of every variety. And while it made for a lavish dessert table, it did no favors to dental health. Some aristocrats, especially in places like Tudor England, ate so much sugar that their teeth turned black. But here's the twist. Blackened teeth became fashionable. Rot became trend. People even painted their teeth darker to mimic the royal look. If the queen's smile was ruined by sugar, then yours should be too. You run your tongue across your own teeth, slightly horrified. The so-called toothbrush of the day wasn't the plastic bristled tool we know now. It was often a frayed twig, or a bit of cloth soaked in wine or vinegar. Some recipes suggested mixing crushed brick, burned rosemary, or ground oyster shells into a paste abrasive enough to scar away enamel entirely. Meanwhile, the face, noble women applied white lead and vinegar to achieve that pale, aristocratic glow. Pale skin was a symbol of nobility, proof you didn't labor under the sun. But the price was steep. Lead absorbed through the skin caused rashes, hair loss, and eventually hallucinations or death. Did they know? Historians still argue whether noble women understood the risks of lead-based cosmetics. Some claim the effects were gradual to subtle, to trace. Others suggest women did notice the sores and sickness, but beauty was worth the gamble. And besides, everyone else was doing it to accent the glow. Noble women rouged their cheeks and lips. Some used carmine, a vivid red pigment made by crushing cochineal insects. Others relied on cinnabar mercury sulfide, which, yes, is toxic. Dabbed on lips with a rabbit hairbrush. It gave the perfect pout right before it gave you tremors and tooth loss. And it wasn't just the face getting the treatment. A noble woman's hair was a high-maintenance project all its own. If blonde was in fashion, and it often was in Italy, women bleached their hair with mixtures of lye, sulfur, and even pigeon droppings. They'd sit for hours under sun hats with the crown cut out, letting the chemicals to bake under natural light. Does it burn? Oh, absolutely. But what's beauty without a little scalp scalding? You might glance again at that mirror, wondering how anyone thought all this looked good. But that's the catch. Beauty standards were different. A chalky face, darkened teeth, a plucked hairline, and penciled brows made you look not sick but elite. And that leads us to one of the weirdest habits of all, removing the hairline. Yes. Noble women in the 15th and 16th centuries often plucked the front of their hair to create a higher forehead. The more expansive the brow, the more refined the mind, or so the fashion logic went. You might find a lady with a perfectly circular head of hair, like the top was peeled back to let out her thoughts. Jokes aside, some records suggest noble women used a blend of walnut oil and vinegar to slow hair regrowth at the temples, creating that distinct moon-like dome. Makeup was so thick and pervasive that layers would often crack or melt during long ceremonies or warm weather. That's where the gentle fan waving came in, not just for style, but to keep their faces from sliding off. And the whole ordeal didn't end with the day. Noble women went to sleep on pillows, lightly dusted with perfume and chalk, to keep their painted skin fresh. In some courts, a lady's maid would gently reapply powder before her mistress awoke so she could greet the morning already beautiful, already unnatural, of course. This entire performance came with a class hierarchy. Only the wealthy could afford the time, tools, and toxic potions necessary to destroy their skin so luxuriously. Peasant women, by contrast, were tan, bare-faced, and healthy, but no one wanted to look like them. By now, you're probably imagining the backstage chaos of a royal ball, the smells, the slipping makeup, the discreet toothaches. And if you're wondering whether any of these noble women ever just gave up, sure, but not publicly. You're back at the mirror now. The noble woman behind you is dabbing her lips with the red-soaked cloth, powdering her cheeks again. she leans, and admiring herself with genuine pride. She looks stunning. She looks terrifying. She looks exactly the way a noblewoman should. Let's take a walk now, not through a palace hall, but through a noblewoman's dressing chamber. The air is thick with lavender, musk, and something you can't quite place. On the vanity sits a silver comb tangled with loose hairs, a glass vial filled with what looks like honey, and wait, is that a dead mouse? Yes, it is. Welcome to the world of animal-based hygiene horrors. Because for all their elegance, noblewomen weren't above using the fur, fat secretions, and carcasses of various animals in the name of beauty. In fact, they swore by it. Let's begin with mouse for eyebrows. Thin, high-arched brows were all the rage in certain periods. But if you plucked too much of your lead-based foundation, caused hair loss, what then? Simple, glue on new ones made from mouse skin. Ladies would cut fine strips of soft mouse pelt and shape them into fashionable brows, pasting them delicately over their foreheads with a bit of gum, Arabic or tree resin. If the mouse look wasn't quite right, some tried rat or squirrel. Natural options, all. Just imagine the horror of one slipping off mid-curtsy. Next up, perfume. You might think of perfume as floral and airy, but 16th and 17th century scents were often anything but. One of the most prized ingredients was civet musk, a glandular secretion, taken from the perineal area of the civet cat. Extracting it was, well, exactly as undignified as it sounds, but the resulting paste was rich and long-lasting, used to anchor lighter notes like rose or jasmine. It was so popular that even Queen Elizabeth I is rumored to have worn civet. Nobles dabbed it behind the ears and on gloves, and mixed it with crushed herbs to freshen up gowns that hadn't been laundered in months. And then there's ambergris, a rare substance found in the intestines of sperm whales, expelled like floating treasure and collected along coastlines. It smelled faintly sweet and marine, and it aged beautifully. Ambergris was used not only in perfume, but sometimes ingested as a tonic or aphrodisiac. So yes, a noblewoman's scent could include cat sweat and whale vomiting, and that was desirable. But we're not done. You lean closer to that vanity table and notice a jar of something glistening, a kind of snail gray sludge. That's snail mucin, or a close ancestor of it. While the modern beauty industry has embraced snail slime for its hydrating and collagen-boosting properties, medieval apothecaries were already recommending it for smoothing the skin and cooling redness. A noblewoman with wealth might pay for crushed snails mixed with honey, rosewater, or even powdered pearls for a luxurious nighttime mask. Of course, the recipe wasn't always precise. Sometimes it was just mashed slugs, applied with a cloth and left to dry. Speaking of cloths, don't touch that soft one hanging on the chair. It's not for cleaning. It's for applying pig fat. That's right, rendered pork fat, known as lard, was a common base for creams, sauves, and unguents, mixed with beeswax and herbs. It made a great moisturizer if you didn't mind the subtle scent of roast dinner. If your skin broke out, which it might, after layers of lead and snail slime, there were other animal-based cures. Crushed frog skin, powdered antlers, even bits of mummified flesh were believed to heal blemishes or balance hot humors. The logic was deeply rooted in humoral theory, where each bodily condition was tied to elements and fluids, and every creature had a balancing effect. And then there were more questionable practices. In parts of Italy, some women used bat blood or pigeon droppings to bleach their skin. In France, crushed pearls mixed with vinegar were applied as a brightening serum, less gruesome, perhaps, but devastatingly expensive and mostly ineffective. Even clothing was complicit. Gloves were sometimes soaked in animal oil, usually deer or sheep tallow, and worn overnight to soften the hands. Think of them as the first moisturizing gloves, just with a bit more barnyard. You step back from the vanity now, overwhelmed by the sheer creativity and horror of it all. And yet, to a noblewoman, none of this was strange. These ingredients weren't seen as gross, they were effective, elite, even magical. If your cream cost a small fortune and came from the belly of a whale, that meant it worked. And remember, these weren't fringe practices, they were mainstream. Recommended in court beauty manuals, sworn by in noble diaries, passed down from mothers to daughters, as precious as any heirloom comb or ruby ring. There's something almost alchemical about it, a belief that if you combine just the right bits of nature, be it rose petals or bat wings, you could hold back time, trap youth in amber, and glow with a light that defied decay. Even if you smelled like a civet's backside while doing it, you're barely recovered from the perfume parade of civet glands and mouse fur brows. But hold tight, because we're heading down an even stranger path now, past the dressing table, past the great hall, and straight into the realm of noble medicine, or rather, noble superstition disguised as medicine. It's no secret that medieval and Renaissance nobles had access to the best apothecaries money could buy. But best didn't always mean effective. And for noblewomen, health rituals often took a turn for the bizarre. We're talking about body-draining detoxes, bloodletting at moonrise, and the slightly terrifying belief that wearing the right gem might stop your womb from wandering. Let's start with a favorite pastime, leeches. Yes, real ones. Imagine reclining in your chamber, a silken pillow under your head, as your maid carefully places fat little leeches behind your ears or on your inner thighs. The idea that by letting them suck out a bit of blood, you could restore balance to your humors and avoid disease. You're probably wondering how often this happened. Well, if you were especially melancholic, emotional, you might be leeched monthly. Women were believed to be naturally more imbalanced than men blamed the uterus. Of course, so leeches were a regular part of noble wellness routines. If that didn't help, you could try cupping, an early version of suction therapy using heated glass or brass bulbs placed along your spine until your skin puckered purple. You'd lie very still, feeling each cup lift your flesh like a jelly mold, all in the name of drawing out bad air. Of course, these were just the entry-level treatments. More ambitious noblewomen dabbled in astrological medicine. You'd consult your house physician not just for your symptoms, but for your star chart. When was your last period? What house was Mars in? Was Saturn retrograde? These details might determine the perfect time to take a laxative or undergo bloodletting. Some calendars even offered ideal dates for enemas. Spoiler, never on a waning moon. You paused, blinking. Yes, enemas. They were considered not just cleansing, but fashionable, especially among French court ladies. Devices ranged from delicate pewter syringes to more elaborate tubing contraptions, often administered by personal attendants. Some women scheduled theirs like spa appointments, lavender oil water on Mondays, milk and honey mix on Thursdays. And then there's the golden elixir. No, not metaphorical. We're talking drinkable gold. Alchemists claimed it could prolong youth, sharpen the mind, and purify the blood. The recipes varied wildly. Some included crushed rubies or powdered coral, but gold leaf was the star. You'd stir it into wine or tincture and sip it from crystal goblets. Was it toxic? Possibly. Did it work? Historians still argue whether these metals had any physiological benefit or whether the glow-up was just from extreme placebo and filtered candlelight. But noblewomen weren't just swallowing questionable substances, they were wearing them. Take bezoars, those rare, stone-like objects formed in the stomachs of goats or deer. Jewelers mounted them in silver rings and pendants because people believed bezoars could neutralize poison. You'd simply dip your jewel into your goblet before drinking just in case a jealous rival had spiked your wine. More dramatic still were live amulets. Some ladies kept dried chameleons sewn into tiny bags and worn at the hip, believing they warded off miscarriage. Others tucked mole paws or bat wings into their corsets for fertility. The logic: nature's oddities possess power. The stranger the animal, the stronger the charm. And don't even get started on mummy powder, ground up human remains, usually Egyptian, believed to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. Apothecaries sold it in tiny vials. Noblewomen mixed it with milk or applied it as a facial scrub. Today, we'd call that unethical and grotesque. Back then, it was cutting edge. Still, if there's one bizarre belief that trumps them all, is the idea of the wandering womb. Ancient medical texts insisted the uterus could move around inside the body, like a mischievous ferret, causing hysteria, breathlessness, and madness. To coax it back into place, doctors recommended sweet scents near the pelvis and foul ones near the nose. So if you walked in on a noblewoman holding garlic under her nose and roses between her knees, don't ask. Even the humble bath wasn't safe. While peasants often went unwashed, nobles bathed in vinegar, wine, or milk. Cleopatra wasn't the only one soaking in donkey milk. French nobles followed her lead centuries later. Bathing in wine was said to boost circulation, prevent aging, and brighten the mood. We bet it did. Of course, these tubs were rarely drained. Water stayed for days, sometimes shared between sisters. By the third soak, it was less healing nectar and more lukewarm soup. But it wasn't all madness. Some of these practices did have a scientific basis. Cupping can increase circulation, and vinegar baths are mildly antimicrobial. But most were born from a tangled web of superstition, observation, and desperation. In a world without antibiotics, you took your chances with a bat heart necklace and hoped for the best. So here you are, sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor, watching a noblewoman sip gold flakes through a straw, her arm outstretched for the leech man, while her maid checks the calendar for Mercury's alignment. It's not wellness, it's courtly chaos. You've made it this far. so you're probably already immune to disgust or just too sleepy to protest. But brace yourself, because even after all the bizarre skincare, toxic perfumes, and medicinal astrology, we haven't touched one of the most intimate and most surprising realms of noblewoman life, bodily hygiene. You might assume that high-born ladies, draped in lace and pearls, were paragons of cleanliness, but beneath those brocaded gowns, things got complicated. Let's begin with underwear or lack thereof. Contrary to the structured corsets and layers of embroidered petticoats, many noblewomen simply didn't wear anything underneath at all. No panties. Just a long chemise and perhaps, if you were lucky, some tied linen around the waist for absorption. Yes, that kind. Why? Well, it wasn't just a fashion choice. Underwear, as we know it, wasn't widespread until centuries later. And with chamber pots instead of flush toilets, going commando made certain things easier, more efficient. Let's say, speaking of chamber pots, noblewomen didn't have private bathrooms. Instead, they relied on ornately painted ceramic pots, or silver basins often kept right next to the bed, and using one didn't mean leaving the room. If you were at court, or in the middle of a feast, you simply stepped behind a folding screen, lifted your skirts, and got on with it. In company, maidservants were trained to carry these pots discreetly, sometimes even mid-conversation. Imagine pausing your embroidery circle to relieve yourself, then returning to your needlework as if nothing had happened. Social norms were flexible when your dress weighed 20 pounds. But let's pivot to the real showstopper, tooth care. Medieval and early modern noblewomen prized white teeth, but not necessarily clean ones. Toothbrushes existed in crude form, think frayed twigs or cloth, but tooth powders were all the rage. The most popular recipes: charcoal, crushed oyster shells, burnt rosemary, and wait for it, brick dust. Yes, pulverized brick. You dip your cloth in this gritty mixture, rub it over your teeth, and hope for the best. Was it effective? Sort of. Did it destroy enamel? Definitely. Historians still argue whether these powders did more harm than good, especially given the rise in tooth decay among nobles compared to peasants. And bad breath. That was handled with chewed herbs, spice wine, or tiny pomanders, hollow perfume-filled orbs you held to your face like a medieval mitt. But teeth were just one part of the grooming process. Let's talk hair removal. Noblewomen didn't just pluck their eyebrows, they often removed their entire hairline. A smooth, high forehead was the beauty standard, so ladies used razors, tweezers, or even lye-based paste to push their hairlines back. The result, a permanently surprised expression that apparently screamed classy. Body hair, also unwelcome. One popular method involved a thick resin paste made of sugar, lemon, and water, essentially ancient waxing. Hot, sticky, and occasionally scalding. It was applied to the legs or underarms and then ripped off with strips of linen. And yes, before you ask, down there, too. Some historical letters mention the preference for childlike appearances. Though this raises uncomfortable debates, historians still argue whether full body hair removal was standard practice or limited to certain courts. France and Italy were especially enthusiastic. Either way, ouch. Let's swing over to laundry, because with all that hair removal and powdering and chamber potting, you might wonder, how often did noblewomen wash their clothes? The answer: not often. Gowns were brushed and aired out, but rarely submerged in water. Instead, linen chemise, the closest layer to the skin, acted as a kind of sponge. These were changed more frequently and washed in hot water with lye or soapware. Think of it like wearing washable underlayers to keep the expensive stuff clean. As for menstrual hygiene, options were medieval at best. Absorbent cloths were pinned into linen bands or tied like makeshift diapers. No elastic, no adhesives, just layers and luck. That's if you even talked about it. Menstruation was considered impure, inconvenient, or simply ignored. Some women visited moon tents or were confined to their rooms. Others just carried on, bloodstains and all, covered by their voluminous skirts. There's even a theory that some gowns were dyed red on purpose to hide the evidence. That's one way to solve it. But possibly the most unexpected thing: the ceremonial undressing. After a long day of courtly posing, dining, and being massaged with goose fat or milk cream, noblewomen didn't just crawl into bed. They were undressed by staff, layer by layer. One maid handled the corset laces, another the stockings. Jewelry was catalogued and locked away. Wigs were dusted and boxed. Some courts even held public bedtime rituals, where nobles were formally put to sleep in front of an audience, like sleep theater. Privacy was a privilege, not a guarantee. And yet, despite all the unwashed fabrics, reused bathwater, and daily mouse fur touch-ups, noblewomen still managed to hold an impossible standard of beauty. Pale skin, no freckles, soft hands. Perfumed hair even if it took a team of servants and the periodic ingestion of crushed gemstones. To achieve, you lie back now, exhausted from the parade of peculiar habits. Your imaginary noble self is powdered, perfumed, and encased in 12 layers of fabric, with a mole's paw in your bodice, a leech on your thigh, and just a hint of brick dust in your smile. Because if you've learned anything tonight, it's this: cleanliness wasn't next to godliness, it was next to whatever was trending at court. Let yourself settle now. You've wandered through the candlelit corridors of long-vanished courts. Watch powdered cheeks crack with sweat and peek beneath velvet skirts lined with secrets. The noble women you met tonight were polished, powerful, and if we're honest, a little odd. But maybe that's the point. Their world was stitched together with myth, etiquette, and blind trust in the latest elixir. They lived in palaces without plumbing, endured corsets that crush ribs, and believed mouse fur might make them irresistible. And somehow, they made it all look effortless. You can picture it now, a quiet bedchamber where the fires burned. Low, a half-empty wine goblet beside a jewel-encrusted comb. The air is thick with rose oil and beeswax. Outside, hooves echo against the cobblestones. But inside, all is still. The candle flickers once, twice, and then fades. Let your breathing slow. Let the powdered wigs, the gilded tubs, and the chamomile-scented leeches drift away. You're not in a castle anymore. You're back in your own bed, wrapped in your own version of soft luxury. No servants, no chamber pots. Just the hum of a fan, maybe, or the cool press of the pillow beneath your cheek. And if you feel the urge to thank your toothpaste and running water, go ahead. You've earned it. Sleep well, dream gently, and I'll see you next time.